Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Charting Your Path, a Roadmap for Modernization. My name is Alok Agarwal. I'm a director at PwC focused on the Industry Cloud for Banking Accelerator, which we'll talk about in a little bit later today. I'm joined by three great colleagues of mine, Lane Martin, who's a principal at PwC, heading up payments within our transformation practice, Dean Nikolakakis, who heads up digital banking within our transformation practice as well, and then Emily Steele, who's the president and COO of Savannah. Welcome, and thank you for being with us today. Really
Thank
looking
you.
forward to the conversation.
Looking forward to it.
So as we think about modernization and how banks are addressing modernization, there are four primary elements that are critical in that space, right? One is delivery excellence, core system reliance, operational effectiveness and efficiency, as well as emerging and cutting edge technologies, right? As we get into that discussion, we'll focus on the first aspect of it. Lane, I'll start with you. You've been in the industry and you've been consulting for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of an initiative where you were a major part of that and which was a great modernization story for a major bank?
Absolutely, Alok, and thanks for the time, and it's good to see you again.
Yeah.
In this industry of ours, we get to go and explore with our clients ways to modernize. It's a huge area of importance for them, and it's very much multifaceted. So, I think you popped on the right elements for us to focus on today. Story-wise, some of the biggest ones that come to my mind in terms of success would be those that actually include all different aspects of what it takes to get funding, get socialization across the entity, to get the right team in place, and then commit to a delivery plan together. So one story that I can tell would be a commercial bank that was looking and receiving a lot of feedback from their customer base, which basically inferred that their platform wasn't satisfactory. There was a ton of pushback around, we are technology companies that are working and developing technology ourselves. Look at your banking platform. It doesn't seem to do anything near what we can do. So as a result, the bank realized that if they didn't take action, they were going to lose these major customers at a time when their balance sheets were growing significantly. So they really decided that what they'd been doing wasn't necessarily delivering the results fast enough and on a timeline basis that would actually result in success over a time horizon that would satisfy their customers. So they collected feedback from the customers and said, okay, how do we do this differently? How do we do this fast? So the first thing that was done was, instead of a lengthy business case process that actually goes out and explores all of the benefits of doing this, started with a prototype. What does the future look like? Show it to me. Build it quickly in a prototype method, and not just use it to actually, see what feature and functionality would make sense to the internal team, but present it to the board to say, this is what we have, this is what we could have. There's a huge difference here, and here's the client feedback. So the socialization approach for that made a big difference because the board said, we want that. And so the funding approval didn't take months, it took one board meeting. So when they made the funding approval, then they looked around in-house and said, hey, how do we actually organize to be able to deliver on this ambition? Now we have the money. Do we have the team? Do we have the ambition? How can we do this fast? And so they took the prototype, and we brought in a team together with them collectively, because they knew that the talent that they had, it was good talent, and it understood their existing systems, but the bogey was meeting a new tight timeline for production with new feature sets that would be differentiating. So they brought in external talent to actually structure, bring in frameworks that could help accelerate delivery, and then actually move through, okay, when we think about delivery, what does that actually mean? Like, our way of delivering in terms of a legacy waterfall approach wasn't going to cut it here. So there was a big focus on changing the delivery style. And again, the intention, not to make this a consulting commercial, but the intent was to bring forward like a new way of doing this with people who actually knew legitimately how to do it. They took the training and the expertise from the outside, and they brought it to the bank to say, let's do this fast together. If you want to stand up Scrum Masters, if you want to stand up a backlog, if you want to stand up the agile tools, let's bring in expertise to get it done right. Let's not try to, learn how to do it. Let's take the expert advice, get it done, set reasonable targets, build out a product increment roadmap, and get to production as fast as possible. So the commitment from the executive team to do and deliver this project differently resulted in business case to production in 5 months, right? Which is kind of unheard of. It was a legitimate commercial bank that was
Yeah.
looking to deploy new digital capabilities to the market, which they did,
Yeah.
and they promoted, and now they're winning awards. So, just the commitment to trying things differently
Right.
and get your funding set up different in a way that's a little bit less typical, but brought in the customer perspective immediately, delivered upon the customer perspective, and relied upon external expertise, actually got them to production. And so the point around the consultant bank interplay was that they used the talent and the resources that the consultancy could provide, and then intentionally weaned off it over time. And
Yeah.
that was the agreement up front, wean off it, right? Consulting, you want to be on the next job and the next
Right.
job. And that worked for them tremendously. So then they hired in the back, and it actually transformed the way that the bank actually delivers projects. So
That's great.
that was probably the top
Yeah.
transformation example that I have, where
Right.
big ambition, big dollars, high pressure, fast delivery,
Right.
safe and secure in the market, and they really did move the needle.
Right. No, that's great. That's great to hear. And I would think that's a way of working that probably translates to other banks that are similar size, bigger, smaller, because I know a lot of banks are struggling in that same regard. So,
For sure.
yeah.
Sure.
Dean or Emily, to you, have you seen something similar in your experiences with the banks that you've been working with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way of working example is a great one. I would say another thing that I'm seeing, it's another dimension
Yeah.
that is actually really revisiting the overall design. Especially the bigger banks that run their technology largely internally.
Right.
They've evolved for years running their own digital channels and kind of running, everything else internally. But if you look at what's actually behind the scenes, it's essentially still a bunch of product-based systems, most of which are very old technology,
Right.
right? And we're not ever actually built on the presumption of having all of this variety of dynamic channels on top of them, right? And so for the larger banks, one of the things that we're seeing, I think that is really a key to success is to define really what that more customer-centric architecture is.
Yeah.
That's really cloud native and kind of takes advantage of not just the old technology that they've had for years, but really modern cloud-based technology. But then figuring out the path for how to incrementally get from the current to that target
Right.
where you can produce value along the way.
Right. Right.
Right. And so we're seeing people do things like bring in, the main functional components that they need. I need a ledger, I need a product master, I need
Yeah.
managing customers, I need a layer of choreography and orchestration. But then figuring out how to enable those layers without making a big shift. Like, no, I don't think there's any bank that is doing modernization entirely in one step.
Right. Right.
Even the ones that are setting up a parallel, bank as a kind of a first step, it eventually then becomes a sequential modernization from the existing bank
Right.
to the new.
Right.
And those are just smart things that you can do to create value along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
That makes sense. And just to extend that, so you've been doing transformation, large scale transformations at large banks for 30 plus years.
Mhm.
You're working with some of the largest banks on core modernization. So extending what you just said, how does core play into the modernization efforts at banks?
Yeah. It's interesting, right? The core, especially the deposit core, if you think about, when the internet happened,
Yeah.
almost every bank had, especially the big banks, already had separate systems for deposits. There's no bank over 100 billion in the US that runs their commercial loans on the
Right.
same system as their deposits.
Mhm.
So at some point, you have a mortgage system, you have a credit card system, you basically have these separate product-based systems.
Right.
It turned out, because most banks were deposit-centric, that when the internet happened, that for the first time they had to create, where were we going to keep track of everybody's accounts, is that they ended up using the deposit system, not to replicate those other products, but they put the actual account number, the accounts and the balances in one place there.
Yeah.
And so that's made it bigger than it needed to be originally, than it was intended to be, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
And so you go into these banks, it's actually interesting, we're working at one right now that the core actually touches about 60% or 70% of the entire bank. Obviously, it's got its main functions of interest calculations and so forth. But when you look at its tentacles, there's a lot of them.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
touching liquidity, it's touching all of operations on the on the back end operations, but it also is directly connected to all the channels, both banker facing and self service,
Right,
which I think
right.
is where you see most of this interaction.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and completely agree. All of the disconnected systems that have been created over time kind of create that complexity,
Hmm.
making modernization even harder. And I don't know, you were saying large banks. I think it's happening across all sizes of financial institutions today. Large banks have more systems, but
Yeah.
we're even hearing that in regional or community or even very small financial institutions, they still have that same challenge of connecting systems together to be able to create a customer view, if you will.
No doubt about
Yeah.
that. I mean, even the banks, frankly, that are the smallest banks that are largely on single bank in a box cores,
Right.
they still have a lot of they suffer from the inflexibility
Mhm.
of the older technology, right? So,
Right.
so they have a little bit of a different approach that they need to take,
Mhm.
but there's benefits of doing those steps that might be done a little differently than in a big bank, even a smaller bank. Owning that choreography integration layer,
Right.
getting more control over your digital channel so that you can personalize it more, modernizing things around payments. Like those are things that even the smallest banks are taking on.
So I would say, though, we are hearing core modernization now more than we have in years.
Hmm.
There was a wave about 10 years ago where people were talking about it. Now they're actually taking action on it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But do we feel that it's mandatory? Meaning, like, we've seen orchestration layers come about and new technologies to actually be able to integrate with existing cores as a prominent way to,
Hmm.
to create a path forward without taking that big bite that
Yeah.
everybody dreads.
Yeah.
People are actually taking the bite, which is
Yeah.
great to see. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts around, do you have to take the bite, or do we have a parallel path to pursue here with these new technologies? Because I hear a lot about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've seen is, like I said before, no one I think is doing this like it's a big bang conversion. We got to risk the whole company. That is totally unnecessary. Um, I do think if you go on a long enough time horizon, you know, there's lots of reasons why we'll end up with everything running in cloud-based modern technology, right? But that time horizon's not a decade. It's probably more than a decade. And so the question is like, what's the path to get there? I think in the near term, there's lots of sources of value around starting to modernize that doesn't have to require replacing the old core right away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in fact, the way that these banks that are doing it, that are justifying it and creating business value along the way, is that they're almost like breaking up this huge group of functionality that's sitting in the core, the big core, let's say. Because when you buy a core from one of the main processing providers, you're actually buying like 60 systems. There's a lot underneath the covers there, and so there's lots of incremental improvements you can make. Doing a better job with doc management, bringing in product and pricing, and getting more flexibility, and creating more dynamic pricing ranges. Creating a transaction hub where you can have full-time access to your data even while the core is not unavailable. There's lots of things like that you can do that put a piece in place that gives you value. And then if you actually paint it forward to when you were going to actually pull the ledger off, eventually it would still be valuable and useful. So that I think is the pattern. I think that's encouraging about the core modernization journey now, is that it's not like a pushing all my chips in and I hope I make it right.
Right.
You can actually get really good value for the pieces along the way.
I think for so long we look at modernization as folks have modernized on the back and they've replaced cores, or at one point it was a big move to digital where
Yeah.
modernization was associated with a core transformation or a digital transformation. And I think that there's a place today, because of what you said, where there's multiple systems and big bang is out, right? Core replacement used to be, okay, I'm going to take all of my products conversion, I'm going to flip it all, a switch one day. But today people want results quicker. They
Yeah.
want early and often improvement and progress. And so I think that there's a new opportunity for modernization that's coming inside the bank, not just starting on the back or the front, but instead looking at it from a banker's point of view. And today, with all the modernization we've done, we've created a bit of spaghetti code, right? You mentioned 60 systems. When I'm talking to leaders in banks today, share one quick example. I spoke to a CEO not that long ago who took a new CEO role at a bank, and she decided the first place that she was going to start was actually sitting in the call center for a month, the branches for a month, and back office for a month. And what she shared was, in doing so, I didn't realize how difficult it was to understand our customers and our relationships, and actually to train and become a productive banker, right? And it's because all of these systems, they're needed to support the bank's business, but there's nothing that's unifying them. They're not connected. None of these systems are actually talking. So if we think about modernization inside the bank, there's a potential to create that bridge for a banker or an enterprise hub that gives them that 360-degree view and maybe even makes it easier to train when you come on board, because you're not toggling between 15 and 20 systems, but instead a centralized system.
Right.
And I think it speaks to your point. Ultimately, you have to get to a modern core because it needs to be real time, but there's choices as where do you start that process.
I think you guys, the Savannah solution is positioned as one of the necessary ingredients in the modern architecture, and the opportunity, frankly, to get that in place early is it's one if you say, where are people starting, right?
Yeah.
They're the banks that are the smallest banks that have 100% outsourced start generally with digital first and saying, I want to run digital and figure out how to be more modern there. A second domain, though, that they bring in is wanting to own the integration layer.
Yeah.
Now, the difference is many of them are taking it with I'm just going to buy an integration tool, right? Which, of course, means all the burden is on them to go, which is fine. If they want to take it more in-house, then they're faced with now building a team and all the methods and figuring out how to really operate in a very different way. And so one of the other shifts I think that's interesting, which I think you guys play right into, right, is the idea that when you're moving into a SaaS model, you don't have to. It's actually been very interesting to watch how much value banks are getting out of the move to a SaaS model, not just because of the functionality, but the fact that it's forcing them to stay up to speed on the latest technology. One of the biggest problems that especially the bigger banks have is, they've created so much complexity and they've also not kept up.
Right.
So you go into these older banks and you go in and you can see it's like an archaeology, experiment. Every
Chopsticks.
version of every integration technology that IBM has ever had over 30 years, just because they've tried to keep up, but they've never been able to fund every aspect enough to keep everything fully up.
And it just
so you end up with lots of variety.
And it just drives up your operational costs from a people and process perspective.
And it causes issues around and challenges around stability. And just maintenance, and you get with 50 people on a phone call to figure out what happened when a problem
Not
happened.
to mention the customer experience is extremely detrimental at that point.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it can be just an integration layer, right? I think we have had integration layers for a long time. It's got to be an integration layer plus that unification from an operations perspective. And Dean, I really 100% agree with what you were saying about how do you stay current? Because an integration layer creates a lot of work. Depending on the size of the institution, if they're building out and owning that integration layer, they have to think about if it's, we won't say 60, if it's 15 to 20 different systems that they're trying to keep up with, that means they've got integrations to all of those that they're maintaining.
Right.
Are there options for accelerators? Are there options for standard adapters that can help financial institutions be able to maintain that and still be current?
Right. Well, I think Lane gave a good example of a company making a shift to a product management infrastructure, agile method. One of the things I think that is key to that is not just learning the method, but then having the discipline to actually act like a SaaS provider, even internally. And you say, hey, if you own this component, it's up to you to make sure that that component stays up and is current. And take the degrees of freedom of assuming everything's going to get done in a project away. Because you're actually going to end up with a much better result if the platforms that you build have that flexibility, because you're thinking about what they need and just funding to basically keep it up, so that then things become plug and play instead of having everything to be, I can't do it because I got to go do another project.
That's right. And then I think one of the initial questions that we have with executives is around the composition of the bank as it is today, and then where should it be in the future? Meaning, a lot of banks don't want to be cutting edge technology firms. They love the relationships, particularly on the smaller side of the house. They're
Mhm.
relationship oriented. They have relationship oriented people. Therefore, the partners that they choose to work with to supply the technology
Mhm.
are much more important because they know that they're not going to commit to a full agile modern delivery approach. They're not going to bring in the system architects and the scrum masters and the overall integration architects and the orchestrators and all of the fancy words. They're not going to do it.
Mhm.
It's expensive. A lot of our banks have rural geographies where the talent just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, I think that it's important to make that designation up front and then figure out how to actually get your delivery approach to align with the vision of what the bank should be in the next 10, 15
Right.
years.
Mhm.
And not ignore that, because if you don't think about that critically, then you start spending money in ways that could actually not benefit you long term. And then, we've seen that time and time again.
Yeah.
So let's get a little bit into some of the platform elements of this, because I think one of the biggest changes I've seen has been, when we think about delivery, it would start with, okay, well, let's dream up these requirements, and then let's run these requirements up against like a marketplace and say, do they meet all of our requirements? And then the vendors come in and they say, this is how it works, and this is kind of how it should work, because we've done this so many times. And then a big clash between requirements and how the vendor's product works. Nowadays, I think we're seeing a very different approach where it's more like receptive of vendors and their products, less time in the requirements traceability front,
That's right. Yeah.
and then use those platforms in ways to then customize and
Yeah.
get into a test development
Right.
cycle where you can put out things that can be tested. It's just a different SDLC.
It is. It is. And on that point, Emily, in your firm, you're in charge of, and you're president of this firm that's building and delivering software to banks of all sizes, right? What are you hearing from your clients in that regard, right? How have things changed, and as they're continuing their modernization journey?
I think we've hit on some of it today with it's not big bang, it's progressive renovation. But I think at the heart of it is banks are still focused on customer experience.
Yeah.
And how do they achieve that? And we've delivered self-service channels. I think there's still work to do because it's kind of product and transactional focused. It's not consultative focused yet from a self-service perspective. But as we brought on self-service, we began to ignore the branch a little bit. The branch began to fall behind in the industry. And what we're hearing from our clients today and banks alike is, how do we begin to bridge the self-service back with the branch? Because we still need to empower consumers to have the ability to self-service and drive their business. They want that. But we don't want to lose the relationship with the bank.
Yeah.
And that's really bringing the two back together. But at the same time, still empowering them to be able to drive as much as they would like from a self-service. If you come into a branch today, often the branch doesn't have the capability to send invitations and help businesses and consumers actually create accounts and drive their financial wellness. It all has to be done right there. We need to bring to the branch the ability to have that self-service, but yet that personalization at the same time.
Right.
And I strongly believe in the platform that you were describing, Lane. In order to bring better customer experience, we have to begin to drive a unified customer relationship for the banker. The banker today is being handcuffed a bit because they can't see the whole relationship. And if we can create a world, and what we're looking at from a technology perspective is platforms, regardless of where a banker is sitting, whether they're in branch, call center, back office. Today, those are often all different systems. But should it be? You're dealing with a customer.
Right.
Shouldn't that be the same system in a single view? And that's really what we're focused on.
Yeah.
There are other platforms as well that do that. It just requires a shift in modernization to bring it inside as well from our perspective.
Right.
Are you hearing the same? You were mentioning platform.
For sure. I also hear that when we think about modernization, the cost of compliance and the cost of regulatory adherence is a fundamental driver of core modernization and platform modernization. So like taking things, particularly in payments, that have a very similar process across all lines of business and thinking more centrally around how to actually execute that to be efficient, but also to be compliant is a big trend right now.
And I think part of that platform is orchestrating all of those processes to give you those safeguards so that things aren't falling on the floor, right? If we're toggling between systems, things get lost, risks get inserted. So I agree completely.
Yeah, I think in that regard, the big opportunity is, if you look traditional bank, right, everything, all the big activities happen in batch. And then like 400 to 600 reports get created or queues get set up for people to go do things, right? And that's been the predominant model because the systems were built, back when batch was the only option, right? But that causes reconciliation and out of sync problems. It causes bolt-on processes and manual processes for regulatory, compliance. Whereas in the more modern, when you go to this orchestration model, and eventually when you get to a real-time core, you can move to this kind of full event-based, world, right? Which we live in every day, right?
Yeah.
If you, I use the example all the time about, as I approach my house, my phone, location-based services on my phone interact, and my lights can turn on, my alarm can turn off, I can, stream music, like that. Literally, the home control that's happened is based because all of those technologies have been built on a modern event-based architecture, right? When you move the bank to a modern event-based architecture, it allows you to move the entire process from a process mindset to a systems mindset, which basically lets the compliance. I mean, today banks are spending huge. First of all, their main operational risks are driven because of not having automated controls, right? And that's a huge risk for the bank. It's actually a huge cost to manage all that and track it and keep up with it. So I think that's one of the biggest opportunities as we help our clients modernize, is to actually modernize the regulatory compliance aspect.
Well, I mean, it's awesome to hear that you play a walk-up song when you get home every day. But
I like to be pumped up.
I know, I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
So, but it leads us to something bigger, which is not all roads lead to a checking account. Not all roads lead to a savings account.
Yeah.
Right? I want walk-up music. I want a new thing as a banking consumer. And
Right.
so, the compliance mandates compress innovation in a way where product development has been what it is in banking for a long time.
Yeah.
But there's a new day coming,
another
right?
huge
So, and when we think about innovation from a product perspective to do things that will add incremental value, and when we think about all of the new banking as a service models that are emerging, and we think about open banking starting to pick up speed in the US and what's to come there, the infrastructure and the ability to provision data compliantly and have things organized is only going to catapult results. And it's going to actually make it so that new product innovation in banking can do things that are actually better than originating and renewing a CD.
That's right.
So
I think of it this way, like, who would build a business where you say no to your customer 50% of the time? If you go to a bank and you say, what are your approval rates for loans, as an example, it's about 50% if you look across all the product types. Why would you ever build a business like that? If you're really long-term on your client, which every bank that we talk to says, well, we want to be advice-oriented, we want to be long-term.
Consultative.
Okay, well then help your client who doesn't yet qualify for that loan, help them by setting up a goal and saving enough so that they can improve their credit, or they can get a down payment. You can start to connect savings behavior to a loan that they qualify for. Like the things that a really good banker does, right? You can actually build it so that's the main way the bank operates overall. Right? So you stop saying no to clients and just showing them how, essentially, right?
And dare I say it, with all this talk about AI, there's a lot of talk about all across the industry, not just in banking.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're doing a lot in using AI and machine learning to take all that data that you just mentioned to then be able to not say no and be able to make it very much personalized to the customer and to the banker, and help the banker as well as the customer have a seamless sort of relationship. And I think what's happened in the last 20 years is, with the advent of the internet, everything's become digital. That personal relationship has become lost.
Yeah.
Similar to what you were saying, Emily, right? And I think we could use AI, machine learning, Gen AI, all these terms and technologies really effectively to really build that relationship again, to make that relationship a lot more cohesive between the banker and the customer. So if the customer is on a digital channel, they can do a lot more self-servicing. You could use platforms like Gen AI to help them with their servicing needs, so that the banker could then focus on sales and relationships and building that long-term relationship with the
Or
customer.
as Emily said, can be aware of all those interactions
Oh,
and
be
use
aware,
that information
exactly.
in their next
Exactly,
consultative
yes,
discussion.
yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys to that is being able to have technology, as Dean said, that's modern and can get you there, right?
Right.
You need technology that's open and extensible to be able to consume Gen AI
That's
to
correct.
improve and modernize, right?
Right,
How do we modernize?
right, right.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a little break from the conversation and we'll show you a demo of PwC's Industry Cloud for Banking Accelerator and how we've leveraged Gen AI to enable a lot of these customer and banker relationships and experiences. So we'll come back to that in a second.
Sounds
Sounds great.
great.
All right. So we've talked a lot today about modernization and how do we help banks accelerate that modernization journey. At PwC, with the Industry Cloud for Banking program, we've done a lot of that heavy lifting. So we've looked at the requirements that all banks are looking for today. We've built out thousands of capability statements. We've got stories and journeys and design specs. We've got integrations with dozens of different systems that are out of the box, all to make it a lot easier for banks to modernize any aspect of their technology stack to better service their customers, bring more capabilities to their bankers, and then really bridge that gap between the banker and the customer channels to make operations a lot more efficient and bring down those costs. So some of what I'm about to show you today will cover a lot of that. What you'll be seeing is a specific use case, leveraging some of our capabilities around Gen AI, but these are going to be real accounts for a persona, Stella, who's going to have accounts across multiple cores, cards, platforms, and then we'll show payment happening as well as integration with a banker when she needs some assistance from a banker. So again, bridging that gap, and then hopefully what you'll get out of this is that you can modernize all of these aspects of your bank very, very quickly using some of our accelerators and our partnerships with leading vendors in the market. So in this demo, what I'm going to be showing is a iOS app that is running on my phone that we have built that shows a slightly different experience than what you might be used to in a traditional banking application. This is an application that's been built as part of our Industry Cloud for Banking Accelerator, where we've partnered with a lot of different firms to bring together an ecosystem of different vendor solutions that have significant market share. And what we've done is we've tried to bring all that together across multiple cores, multiple payment systems, so I can have multiple cores running in parallel, side by side, some of which we talked about today, to bring all of that view into one single pane of glass, right? And what you're looking at on the screen right now is a welcome message from Cooper, who is our AI persona. So we built this using our partnership with OpenAI, and it's running ChatGPT in the background to understand the conversation I'm about to have with Cooper. We do have some traditional elements on this application so that I can still see my accounts as I would normally. I can drill into my checking, my savings, my credit cards. So again, we're communicating with legacy core banking platforms, modern core banking platforms, card systems, et cetera, to be able to bring it all together into a single pane of glass. And this can apply not just on the customer channel, but it could be leveraged on a banker channel as well. So this is just an example of an experience that can serve as an accelerator for banks. So I'm going to jump into the conversation. And as you can see, I've already started to do some conversation with Cooper. At the very top, we've got some personalized offers that come up, and this is based off of the persona of the user that's logged in. So I'm currently logged in as Stella. Stella has been doing a number of transactions until now, and based on that, she's getting a number of different offers for high-yield savings accounts, a fee waiver because she's been doing a lot of wire transfers, ride share coupons, so on and so forth. So this is highly personalized for Stella based on her transactional history, based on her demographics. And if somebody else logged in, they would get different offers. And these offers would be available on the banker side. So as she's in this application looking at these offers, the banker will have these same offers that are available to him or her to then communicate with Stella if they wanted to. Additionally, we're able to change the language. So if Stella wanted to change the language to Spanish or French or any other language, we've just configured it for a few. You'll see that the language changes immediately because we have configured this in a way that it's all externalized, so there's nothing hard-coded in the platform. And if Stella was a multilingual speaker, if she started speaking Spanish to Cooper, immediately Cooper would understand that Stella is trying to talk to him in Spanish and respond in the same language, right? So we've got that multi-language capability as well. Now, as you can see, as I was doing transactions earlier, I can have a very natural and ongoing conversation with Cooper. And by the way, Cooper is configurable. It could be any persona, any name that you wish. And we can integrate this into your current digital and banker experiences. But I can see all my transactions, my balances, and I can ask it things in a very natural way, whatever is comfortable. These are not pre-trained models as you might be used to with chatbots because it is a large language model, ChatGPT running in the background. So let me do a couple of quick transactions. So for example, I'm gonna send some money to a beneficiary of mine, send $550 to Mike. So as you can see, I can also, in addition to typing, I can also just talk. And as I'm talking, what's happening is under the covers, we've already done a lot of integrations through a integration layer that PwC has created called Cloud Intelligence that allows us to integrate with a variety of different systems very, very quickly and easily. And so at this stage, it's found a mic that I can send some money to, and I can respond again in a very natural way. I could say yes, yup, sure, whatever I'm comfortable with. So I'm going to respond saying, sure, that is the mic that I was looking for. And then it's going to take me through a number of different steps to send money to Mike, right? So I can send it from my savings or my checking account. I can change the dollar amount as well if I needed to, but let me just select my checking account. The next step in the journey, it recommends the fastest and most affordable way for me to send that transaction. If I made it a larger dollar amount, you'll see that it immediately gives me another payment method, which is wire as an option, but I'll just do $550. And when I hit send, Cooper is communicating through Cloud Intelligence, choreographing all the different systems interactions to then be able to send that money. And the first thing it's going to do is ask me to put in a one-time password that hopefully it's sent to my email, and then it should pop up in a minute here so that the password is authenticated. There we go. And now once Cooper authenticates the password, the transaction should be completed. And that will be deducted from my core banking platform, and the payment will be sent to Mike. So all that choreography is happening very quickly there. So that's just a quick transaction that I want to show you. Obviously, a lot of different possibilities here. Literally every single servicing feature could be enabled through this platform, as well as account opening, onboarding, and so on and so forth. So some of what I've shown today, we were able to develop very, very quickly because of a lot of the process and technology changes that we've put into place. We're able to get stories up and running and epics up and running in Jira using Gen AI and AI capabilities and have those created automatically for us, which then feeds into our development process as well as automated testing. So maybe Lane or Dean or Emily, what are you seeing in the market in response to what I've demoed today?
Well, to me, this brings us back to the beginning and where we started.
Yeah.
Right? Business case prototype, show me something that actually inspires development that's modern in banking. So this is way beyond a prototype. This is actual functionality that was built that works across different live core applications, and it goes well beyond creating something that's dummied up, if you will. Right? The connectivity is real. And also, I think you'll get into it a bit, but the component architecture of how it is set up for this thing to be custom. This could be a platform that we would build for a client, but it could be very custom to their environment. And so therefore, this is a great example of the speed at which, in today's environment, we can make real feature-rich applications for customers, for our clients, in a way that what shows the vision. It shows the future interaction model with the bank.
I like the fact that the design, first of all, the language is really natural. So it's not, I only know how to do a limited number of things. And it seemed to keep the context from the previous part of the conversation, which I've seen some of the
Right.
kind of older style chatbots are like, they just have a very limited menu of what they know and they can't remember what you were
Right.
just talking about. The other thing, which I think is really great, is you're able to bring the functionality to the experience. It wasn't, a lot of times you see the experiences that people have built where they exit from here and it just pushes you to somewhere else. And then you get, like, how do you come back?
Right.
Like, this is,
Right.
everything was very in line, which I think is much more, nicer for the user.
Exactly. We're trying to keep it a natural conversation. Going back to some of the discussion we've had today, over those 20 years, we've lost that personal connection. And so this brings it back to, it feels like you're having a natural conversation with a banker, even. And that's where a banker can jump in and it'll feel natural between Cooper and banker. You're not really talking to an AI. Hopefully, you forget that you're talking to a technology. And maybe it just looks like a real person. I think it'll help banks drive up loyalty, drive up engagement, and have that stickiness that a lot of banks are looking for.
I think it also begins to bring forward more self-service.
Mhm.
Digital has gotten a
Right.
little bit stale, right? We can check our balances, we can do transactions, and that's about all that we do with most of our accounts. And with modern Gen AI and modern technology, we can begin to bring more to a consumer
That's right.
at the same time.
Right.
But it also requires bridging that technology from core through to the customer
Yep.
so that you can get that
Right.
consistency and seamless interaction.
And you can also have this technology prompt the customer to
Yeah.
take action, right? So as I'm sending some money to Mike in this case, if I'm repeatedly doing it, like I do with my college-age son, he's asking me for money all the time, Cooper can maybe recommend, hey, maybe his rent is due or the tuition is due,
Yeah.
and set that up for me rather than me always having to remember. So it can also serve as a companion,
Mhm.
which is, I think, where the world is headed anyway. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now let me show you a different type of interaction within this app. So let's say Stella needed some assistance from a banker, but was asking for some financial advice. So let's say Stella says, give me financial advice, right? And in this case, what'll happen is we've put some guardrails into our system so that from a regulatory perspective and a risk perspective, maybe the bank is not ready yet to have an AI provide financial advice to its customers. So in that case, what'll happen is the moment Stella asks for that advice, it'll transfer the request to a physical agent. And that agent could be sitting in a call center, or it could be a banker. It could be Stella's relationship manager that picks up that request and starts chatting with Stella. So in this case, now Stella's chat has gone to that banker, and the banker can say, hello, Stella. Stella will see that on the app side. And now Stella can also reply to that chat. And then they can have that back and forth between each other for whatever Stella needs. Maybe it was just financial advice, or maybe Stella's in the middle of applying for a mortgage or asking for a loan. And Jay, the agent or the banker that's helping Stella, can jump into the conversation at any point and stay with her to help her with her needs. Given the demo and everything that we've seen today, maybe some final thoughts. And maybe we'll start with you, Emily, from what we've seen in the demo and what we've talked about today. Do you see any relevancy with what you're doing at Savannah and your clients as well?
I do. From a self-service and a digital perspective, I love the introduction of AI and adding that because it's the perfect way to begin to improve the customer experience. But it doesn't end there. And I think what you've just shown, Alok, with really marrying that to the banker and making that experience, regardless of whether a customer is in a self-service channel or a bank-assisted channel,
Yeah.
they've got the same information. And the opportunity, I think, is to additionally layer that so that in your example, it's likely a call center, but regardless of whether it's back office, call center, or branch,
Yeah.
that layer should have that full view of Stella's
Yeah.
relationship
Yeah.
and then be able to manage it. And I think what you've shown is that technology can support it. And at Savannah, we're working on the exact type of technology where it's bankers platform and digital platforms to support that. And if they're extensible and open enough, they can take these accelerators and really build what you've shown.
Right. Dean, any final thoughts from you?
I mean, to me, the exciting part is that because the industry cloud that we've built has really all the main journeys and all the main underlying systems through partners that we have, that was all real.
Yeah.
And then the fact that you know, in a relatively short amount of time, we were able to layer this entirely new AI-enabled experience, but not have to rebuild all of those underpinnings.
Right.
To me, that's the really exciting part, because as we talk to clients, right, that's really not something that's only open to really large banks.
Right.
And I think that's really, I think one of the key messages I like to leave the audience with is, we're talking to $3 billion credit unions and up to the largest banks in the country. And it's really more about the management team's appetite for innovation and to be, a thriver in the
Right.
in the ecosystem, more than the size of the bank, right? These
Yes.
sorts of things are available for banks of all sizes to go at.
Regardless of bank size,
Yeah.
I mean, customers across the country have similar expectations. There's different demographics where there's different preference and more branch models in
Yes.
some markets than others. But when we think about digital, the puck is moving, so the
Yeah.
saying
Mhm.
goes.
Yeah.
And when we think about provisioning experiences like this, it's the expectation.
Right.
So what's refreshing to me is the speed at which it can be done, really done, not just prototyped.
Right.
And then also from a cost perspective, the fact that you don't have to break the bank to do
Yeah.
something like this.
Exactly.
I mean, the actual plumbing to make this work and the accessibilities of the APIs to exchange information like this is, as long as you set up the right sort of landing zone for your data and you're doing things like migrating to modern infrastructures that are cyber secure,
Right.
you have the ability to actually capitalize on this. And so banks are doing a lot of the legwork that can enable this.
Yeah.
So I'm just inspired because I think there's real transformation coming as a result of where we are.
Yeah.
I do
So.
too.
Well, I wanted to thank all of you for joining me today and making the time for having this great conversation. If you're looking to modernize your bank in any aspect, and if you are interested in anything we've talked about today, please definitely do get in touch with us. And if there's any questions, please send them across. We'll be happy to answer them offline, as well as engage with you in a conversation post that. Thank you so much.